falling oil prices mean falling revenues for the oil-rich nation of Nigeria. This as that country fights an Islamic insurgency and struggles to pay for overdue infrastructure projects. Joining us now for more on the situation and how it might factor into next month's national election is Mark Warner, principal at MA Law and Policy Advisors. Welcome to the program. I know why you're laughing, because we were talking before we started about your law firm is called M-A, it's spelled M-A-A-W, and I was saying, what does that stand for? And it stands for?
MA Law.
MA Law, your initials.
Exactly.
And I was asking you how to pronounce that. Long Ma. Enough about that. Let's talk about Nigeria. I want to bring up a map of Nigeria just to remind people where in the world Nigeria is. It's in Africa, and it is that continent's leading oil exporter. In 2013, production was 2.37 million barrels per day. In that same year, GDP standing at 521.81 billion. The break-even price for oil in Nigeria needs to be at about $122 per barrel. Okay, Mark, given all that, how dependent is Nigeria on its oil revenues?
So Nigeria is very dependent on oil, obviously. I think oil accounts for 90% of its exports. It accounts for 75% of its sort of budget revenues. And so it hasn't really been a diversified economy yet. They're trying to talk about diversifying it. I think all oil economies all over the world, I think including Canada, struggles with how to diversify. That's the curse and the benefit of oil, right? It's when oil prices are high, why wouldn't you invest heavily in that, and why would you diversify? So they're trying to diversify. What Nigeria has, though, that I think helps it is it has developed a sort of a domestic market, because it's the most populous nation in Africa. I think 177 million people. It tends to have a pretty self-sufficient internal market, which means although oil represents 90% of its exports, it can service itself, its domestic needs for a lot of sort of manufacturing things. So they can weather some of this oil bump a little bit better than other countries. What oil the problem that oil also raises is that people talk a lot about corruption in Nigeria, and corruption, if you like, or flows of money between people is a way of, I'm thinking of the word from the Mulroney thing we had a couple of years ago, the Greichschmuck, or whatever the Germans call it. It's a way of greasing the system in some sense and getting rid of problems. Corruption, there's a lot that's wrong with it, but it's a way of easing tensions between ethnic groups and people and other rivals. And so that remains to be seen what that's going to do.
They're worried in Nigeria then.
I think they are worried. I mean, clearly the oil is the oil price reduction is going to hurt them a lot, and it also means that some of as I said, the grease that lets the system work, there's going to be less of that to go around. Now, on the one hand, that could be a challenge. It could be an opportunity for Nigerians to get serious about dealing with corruption, because if there's so much money filtering out of the system in corruption, then that represents a savings that maybe this opportunity, they can use this as an opportunity to fix. Although, it's also that it also represents an opportunity to keep.
Yeah, most people who are involved in corruption aren't very interested in fixing corruption. So we'll see how that all plays out. For the average Nigerian, I mean, 90% of exports, 75% were the numbers you threw out. What's the effect for the average Nigerian with the price drop in oil?
Well, they're going to see, obviously it affects the exchange rate, particularly with the US dollar. There's been a great decline. So imported goods are going to become a lot more expensive. So that's going to hurt throughout the system. It's going to hurt people in the middle classes and the new classes that are working in business and IT and that sort of thing. They're buying expensive foreign cars. It's also going to hurt people on the ground. And so one of the great issues that Nigeria struggled with, even though it's an oil economy, has to do with the subsidies which they use for fuel, for ordinary homes and for cooking and that sort of thing. And that's historically been subsidized. When they have tampered with that in the past, it has led to a lot of popular uprisings. And I think if you're looking for an obvious place for the government to start saving money, part of it will be in that fuel subsidy. And so that's also a risk as well.
And they've got elections coming up.
And they have elections coming up.
Okay, I want to read, we'll talk about the elections in just a minute. I want to read something printed just a couple of days ago in the Financial Times. It's quite a long quote. Bear with me. Here we go. In 1983, as now, Africa's leading oil producer was in the throes of an oil shock. The resulting collapse in state revenues revealed how bloated and corrupt government had become during the preceding boom when politicians were awash with petrodollars. Austerity beckoned, and General Buhari imposed it with a war on indiscipline in the 20 months before he was overthrown by rival officers. He has tried unsuccessfully to win back power at the polls 3 times since civilian rule was restored in 1999. But on each occasion, 2003, 2007, and 2011, world oil prices were either recovering nicely or close to peaking. The tough outlook this year for Africa's largest economy, which depends on oil, as Mark pointed out, for more than 90% of export earnings and 70% of state revenues, sets the scene for a much tighter contest this time around. Okay. Recapped a lot of what you said, but it points to the elections, which are Valentine's Day, February 14th, I think. How's this all going to affect these elections?
So, I mean, so Buhari has been a president, as you mentioned before, when he was a military, as well as when he came to power as a result of a military coup, and he was also overturned in another military coup. The last time he ran in 2011, a lot of people think that he might have actually won that election. There was, I think, a lot of sort of interference, shall we say, in the voting.
Rigging.
In the rigging. That's a better word. So at least the allegations of that, whether they're true or not, that's certainly the allegation. So I think if we can go backwards a little bit, I think to understand a little bit, the key, since Nigeria returned to democracy in 1999, there was a notion that there would be a kind of an alternation, because the country is largely divided in terms of a Muslim north and a Christian south, and the first president, Obasanjo, came from the south, but because he'd come from the military, and historically, the military, from the time of British colonialism, the military had been drawn from the northern regions, from the House of Fulani ethnic groups, and from the Muslim north. And so because of that military background, the military and the northerners largely seemed to accept Obasanjo, who stayed there for a long time. When Obasanjo finally agreed to leave office, and to not seek a re-election, seek a third term, he handpicked a successor who was a Muslim, and there we get that sort of divide. That's sort of, well, the alternation principle that we even have in Canada, that the Liberal Party historically had, English, French, right. English, French, and that was the way it was.
Official.
Well, it's not, and nor was it in Nigeria.
Fair enough.
But it was a notion that that's how it was supposed to work.
Right.
And Obasanjo handpicked his successor, a Muslim, who turned out to be very, very sick and died. Now, the current president, Goodluck Jonathan, who everybody knows from his cowboy hat that he liked to wear until
that great name.
Until these current elections, is a Christian from the South and from a minority tribe. But nobody ever thought that Goodluck Jonathan would become president. He was kind of a Dan Quayle figure for those people who are old enough to remember that cultural reference. He was chosen, and when the Muslim president died, he stepped in and he got to like the job. And because of that, I think the Northerners largely feel, wait a sec, this was our turn. What happened to alternation? We've waited through Obasanjo. We finally had a Muslim. Yes, the guy died. Step aside, Mr. Jonathan, and let's have our turn, which he has not done. So that makes the election all the more complicated because it's going to flare up these historic divides in Nigeria.
And as this campaign is going on, is the price of oil, what it means for Nigeria, playing out in the various party election platforms?
You know, to a very limited degree. What Goodluck Jonathan is promising is to keep on with the economic reforms that Obasanjo began and that he has sort of gone with, and to crack down on corruption in his own way. The opposition leader, if you like, Buhari, who's a former general, he is really running on a security platform. He's saying, I was a general, I got the thing straightened out last time, I can do that again. And he really hasn't focused that much on his economic platform. No one's all that clear what it is. The party he's running for, I think, is called the All Progressives Congress, APC. And there are some more left-wing people within that party. But I think a lot of people think that really the status quo, like the business community, which is concentrated in the largest city of Lagos, is largely probably going to support the APC and support Buhari. So you kind of think and those are the folks who probably like the economic turn the government has taken. So I think that probably suggests that he would keep on to a large extent with the existing program. And you know, there's a Goldman Sachs executive, Jim O'Neill, who coined the term BRICS and mint and all these things. And he's recently come out and said that he doesn't anticipate that a Buhari victory would be catastrophic or would be a real problem for Nigeria. And that's a bit of a vote of confidence in the election and in Nigeria.
Well, I'll tell you well, we all know, I don't need to tell you, a big problem for Nigeria, Boko Haram. Now, we have, I don't know, about 8 minutes left or so. I want to talk about Boko Haram. I want to bring up a map of Nigeria again. There are 3 states in the northeast where Boko Haram, much publicized insurgency, has been going on. It's taken control of those northeastern regions. Now, you know, sitting from afar, maybe we see it differently. It seems pretty nasty in Nigeria right now with Boko Haram. I mean, is it even possible to hold a fair or even hold any kind of election with what's going on in the Northeast?
So I think there's 2 points. I'd come at it 2 ways. In the last elections, the violence that was taking place before the elections in 2007 and 2011 was really in the south, in the oil-producing delta regions. And actually one of the reasons that Goodluck Jonathan was chosen to be on the ticket was that he comes from that oil-rich delta region, and that was an attempt to placate the violence that was breaking out there. So and he was instrumental in bringing about a peace agreement between the various parties in the south. So, and that from Nigeria in some sense is actually, it's hard to say it this way, but a more significant problem for Nigeria, because it's violence that's taking place in the economic heartland where the oil is produced. There isn't much that's really of economic significance in the north so far, as tragic as Boko Haram has been, but it's not catastrophic to the evolution of the Nigerian economy at this point.
It's tragic.
It's tragic for many, many people.
And the families. Precisely. And all the destruction going on.
So, you know, in terms of the displacement of people, you know, I think some estimates are it's about 1 million people. The other problem Nigeria has with the election is I think they're going to be voting for the first time to help get around the concerns of rigging the vote using biometric cards. And the biometric cards have been mailed to people through the Nigerian Post, which is a little more reliable than Canada Post. Sorry, Canada Post.
Meaning?
So there's real doubt that some people estimate that at least maybe up to 30 million people may not receive their card.
And then they can't vote.
And it's not clear, but that's disputed. I mean, John Kerry, the Secretary of State, was there recently in Nigeria. He was encouraging them to go ahead with the vote as scheduled, thought that was important.
Because Nigeria's security chief talked about postponing the election, right?
The security chief talked about, the election commission looked at it and said, no, we're going to go ahead. And I think the reality is this, that Goodluck Jonathan, the president, is not going to win in the north. They've got a complicated, you know, that's going to vote heavily for the Muslim candidate, Buhari, the general. And so it's not really going to, the distortion that could come from Boko Haram is probably not significant to overturn the result of the election. But it has a very complicated electoral system where in order to win, you have to win essentially 50% of the vote nationally, and you have to win something like 25% of the vote in 2/3 of the states. So that adds a level of complexity to it. But I don't think, Boko Haram is a serious situation, but it probably is not going to distort the election, other than the fact that Buhari is making a big deal out of the need to return security in the north and is claiming that he can do it in 100 days.
Okay, there's been a lot of talk about how the government of Nigeria is doing in terms of cracking down on Boko Haram. I think a lot of people would argue it's not doing very well, given what's going on the ground. Let me just sort of tie our 2 tendrils together, which are the economic and the political. I mean, would low oil prices have any effect on a government's ability to respond to the insurgency? In other words, is this any way going to help them cracking down on these guys?
I don't really think so. You know, I don't think directly. I think it's the other part we haven't really talked about is that there has been a relatively recent find of oil in the north. And a region, there's a thing called the Lake Chad, which borders onto 3 or 4 African countries. And so the neighbor next door, Chad, has been getting this oil out of Lake Chad, and Nigeria has not really been able to develop Lake Chad, which is significant because remember, the oil has been largely historically produced in the south in that delta region. If you could produce oil in the north, that would be a whole new source of wealth. Obviously, as oil prices decline, as we see with Alberta,
it's getting less revenue.
It gets less revenue, and it's more. You're not going to actually start developing, as we're seeing in Alberta, right? There's less investment in going after new projects. So those new projects that could bring to a whole new level of development to the north are constrained. And the other part of it, and this is the key part, some of the Boko Haram appears to be getting a kind of safe haven next door in Chad. And there are some strange linkages between some of the politicians in the north. Remember, they're Muslim and the neighbors are Muslim, and they don't really like this Good Luck Jonathan. They think he's an interloper, should not be there in the south. So that's kind of how it all ties together.
Well, I suppose it ties together in this way as well. You don't bring in as much revenues because of the price of oil. You don't have as much money to spend on a military to go after the insurgents as well.
It could. I don't think that's going to be Nigeria's huge main problem. I think they have a military that they can fund now. The issue really is, I think it's more on the side of how do you get these various local leaders, state governors, how do you get them to come along for the ride in security? Because Nigeria is a federal country, much like Canada, except the state governors have a lot of military responsibility. So there's the federal military, but in terms of putting down Boko Haram in the north, whatever the president is has to get a lot of buy-in from the local governors. And in order to do that, you've probably got to distribute some money to those local states and to the people who have the ability to make things happen up there. And
we shall see. It's an interesting country with a lot going on. Thank you for helping us understand Nigeria. I appreciate it, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.